Well, hello, everyone. Welcome to episode 7 of Dojo Talk. My name is Paula Bell, also known as the BA martial artist. And the purpose of Dojo Talk is to provide a training ground, the dojo, for business analysts to hear from experts and thought leaders in the industry. And today I am joined by a special guest, my BAFF, Joe Newbert. Joe Newbert is a consultant, a writer, a speaker, and above all, a teacher. He's a chief training officer at Business Change. He teaches some of the best business analysis training on the planet, supporting thousands of business analysts to catapult their careers. He's a popular conference speaker. He co-authored the original IIBA Business Analysis Competency Model and served as a non-executive director on the IIBA South Africa Strategy Board. Joe is the showrunner at the Business Analysis Podcast Network 168 FM and an editor-in-chief at the Interview Report, and he also writes and fits in stuff on his blog. Welcome, Joe, to the show. Hello, my
Paula.
friend.
How are you?
I am doing well. But you know what's not doing well? Is my LinkedIn live session. Because I am not seeing it going for some reason, even though it's saying it is. Oh, here we go. I got it back up. All right. It was my computer. We're good. Because, I want to make sure that everybody
It's been a day for LinkedIn Live issues, right?
Yes. So funny story for those listening. Well, it really wasn't funny this morning, but it's funny now. For some reason, this broadcast was showing that it had already happened. But it was only showing that in StreamYard. It was showing that it was coming up today on LinkedIn and YouTube, and I could not get this thing to change. I had to delete it like twice and confuse you with the time changes and all that, Joe. So I'm sorry with all those changes, making you almost have little strokes and heart attacks this morning, but we made it happen. We're here. We are here. And I'm so happy to have you. And I get to interview you now.
I know.
This is great.
I've been on a couple of pods, but people don't really invite me on, Paula, so this is quite unusual to be on this side. Yeah.
Okay. Well, this is going to be a great experience. Actually, you kind of fostered this particular topic and pod and when I was a guest on your Future Business Analyst podcast.
Yeah.
And one of the items that came up was diversity, equity, and inclusion. And I know after we did the Future Business Analysis pod, you had mentioned, I wish we could have gone deeper with the diversity, equity, and inclusion conversation. So I said, well, let's make that happen, Joe. Let's go deeper. And here we are today.
Here we are. I might be living to regret my words on that. I've no idea. I mean, you opened this show with experts and thought leaders, and then DEI, and I'm a total amateur in this, really.
Well, you may not be though. Think about where you've lived, right? So you've lived in the UK, you're now in South Africa, you have many different experiences. And I know sometimes people might think, what do our non-melanated people or or people who are not of color, right? What do they know about diversity, equity, and inclusion? I actually want to break that stereotype and that perception a little bit, because I do feel that all of us, diversity is more than just race, right? Diversity has many different dimensions. It has many different layers to it, and all of us have difference. And so breaking away from that stereotype is one thing that I want to help with, but also there is very needed conversations within the race topic and whatnot. But here's the question I have for you.
Okay.
What do the terms diversity, equity, and inclusion mean to you, Joe Newbert?
I think it's like you say, the first thing to pop into people's mind, perhaps when that comes in, are things like disability, religion, race, gender, that kind of thing, right? Because I think they get a lot of headlines. But like you say, there's layers here. So I think for me, it includes things like income, education, experience, and like a whole bunch of other things. And I actually want to start on the antonyms of those words, because I think really it's about uniformity, stability, imbalance, exclusion. That's what the flip side of DEI means, really. So that means it's about, I guess, being fair, about bringing value. I mean, if you think about the word equity from an organization perspective, a business perspective, a finance perspective, equity is about value.
Right.
So I thought that was really interesting. Of course, variety, equality, just embracing the difference in people, I think, is probably what it means to me.
Okay. So I loved how you came in on the opposite side of it with exclusion, getting that balance, getting that uniformity, getting that unity. Why do you feel that these terms, diversity, equity, and inclusion, and why did it resonate with you so much when we had our conversation? Why do you feel this is so important for business analysts and the work that we do?
I just think before we even get to BAs, I think it's just good for humankind, right? I mean, as you introduced, I mean, I spent my first 28 years in the UK, and I mean, the UK is a very different place now to what it was when I left those shores. But arriving in South Africa, suddenly your eyes are opened, and I don't even want to say that my eyes are wide open now. I'm just saying they're wider than they used to be, and it really, there's a lot of stark difference in people's opportunity, and I think inclusion is about opportunity. That word really, like giving people opportunity. So I think it starts there, and for me, I mean, I was this. I'm not going to say I'm prepared here, Paula, because I'm not prepared. Okay, but I have. This is probably the pod that I've prepared for the most, because it is an interesting conversation for me, and I want to give it my best. I feel like it deserves my best, this conversation. And one of the things, I suppose, is just about seeing some of those stark differences. And I feel like there's never been more diversity in the world than there is today. And I was thinking about that statement, like what does that mean to you, Joe? And I think, for one, we are more connected than we have ever been. And I suppose, to tie it into business analysis, but just by way of trying to illustrate what I'm trying to say, is if I think about personas, we've probably, if we were to add up all the sort of kinds of personas that there are in the world, we've probably never had so many unique, different personas. Before, I feel like the grouping of people, the categorization of people was probably a lot narrower than it is today. But just through the world's technology, the way we're connected, the kind of choices and freedoms that we have, I just feel like it's probably like we're in the greatest moment of diversity we've ever been in. Is that something that you can resonate with?
So I think my perspective is a little bit different. So I grew up in New York City. I grew up in Brooklyn. I grew up upstate. So if you think about New York City, the city itself, where a lot of people are more familiar with, it's always diverse, right? It's like a melting pot of diversity. So I
Okay.
was around that all the time. I was around different cultures, around different people. Now, when I spent some time in upstate New York, you could definitely see the difference, because there weren't many people that looked like me in the city that I lived in. There was only maybe a handful. And the way you communicate and the way you navigate is very, very different, because you almost feel in a way that you don't fit in some way. Now,
Okay.
some of that's your own mindset, but some of that could also be the environment, and how the environment is shaped and formed, and how you are seen in the environment as well. I will say, from what I've seen as I have traveled through this journey of life, And especially after 2020, I have seen people want to be more aware.
Yeah.
But I also have seen people who have a mentality that has a lot of different biases, stereotypes, prejudices that they will not let go of because it's ingrained in them.
Yeah.
And so there are going to be some people who are just never going to believe that there's any issues or any problems that we have in the world. And those are the people that unfortunately you're probably not going to be able to reach. But I do think there is an awareness, a little bit more of an awareness and an appreciation for difference, but I still don't think we're there yet. And in some ways, Joe, honestly, I can't speak internationally all the way, but in some ways in the US, I think we're going backwards, unfortunately.
Yeah. Well, one of the things I was going to say, so like on one hand, like I say, I feel like there's more, like humankind has never been more diverse than what it is now.
Mm-hmm.
And I agree with you. I think through that, there's a lot of people there's just there's this feeling for humanity through a lot of people, through a lot of companies, like doing right for people, planet, and all of that stuff. But
Right.
at the same time, politically, there's this other extreme in a number of different places. A lot of wars happening right now, a lot of atrocities, a lot of very divisive politics. And I feel like there's actually almost a building of polar opposites that's happening at the moment. And that actually worries me a little bit, because at some point something's going to happen with that, and
Mm-hmm.
one's just never quite sure. But I do take the positive that, as you say, I think more people are aware. I think more people are trying to do the right thing by everybody else, and it's wonderful to see that.
Yeah, and I think we have a comment here from Christine, and I think this is a very valid comment. There is fear too. Not only do people not want to intrude, they don't want to offend, right? So there's a fear that, am I going to say the wrong thing? Am I going to ask the wrong thing? And I like to give people grace. I know 2020 was a year that changed the world forever.
Yeah.
And I know in 2020 there were things that were happening here in the US, not just with the pandemic, but with a lot of social unrest and social injustice and things of that nature. Those things were coming to the forefront. And I know you have individuals who are exhausted, especially the people of color. They're exhausted on educating. They really do feel we should be further than we are. Some of the conversations we're still having, we shouldn't be having.
Yeah.
And then there are other individuals who just don't get it. And it's not, and I don't think they don't get it intentionally. I do think there are some people who are out there who, again, they're not going to change their mindset and whatnot. But I like to err on the side of, there are people who are really trying to do right, like you said. And there are some people who I believe they've shut down because they just don't. I would rather not say anything. And that way I know I won't intrude and I know I won't offend, than say something and have to take the backlash of that, especially from somebody who may not have as much grace or mercy or empathy to someone who's still trying to learn, because we're all on different journeys in our diversity, equity, and inclusion journey. We're all not at the same point. And so I can see how fear is definitely something that will. Do you feel that way? Okay, so I'm gonna say, let's get really
Well,
real here. Let's get really real here, Joe. You're
okay,
a
ask me.
yes, you are a non-melanated friend of mine. Right. You are looking at you, white male, right? How comfortable do you feel having, you already said you prepared a little bit more for this conversation because you want to do right. How comfortable do you feel having conversations like this where people are going to be vulnerable and open up, and they might say things that are going to make you feel uncomfortable?
I actually feel okay. I mean, like Christine says, there is fear, right? I mean, I had some anxiety. No, I mean, the moment you said come on the show, I said yes. It wasn't like an or an ah, but beforehand, I was thinking, what if I say the wrong thing? What if I put my foot in it? What if I offend the audience in some way? And and I think that's, what, it's actually good that I feel that, because I feel like that's showing that I've got a level of insight and that I'm trying to do the right thing. So I do think there is that there. But the same token, I mean, so in South Africa, and as I say, please, I'm no expert here. I'm no thought leader on this. And I have and I wasn't here like at the major struggles of the time or the point that independence was. I was here 10 years after that, but it's quite an open conversation here in many ways, and it'll be the same. There's a lot of people frustrated as well. They think they should be further along. There's legislation in place, but legislation's one thing. I feel like people are another thing there. So conversations do happen, and it's quite straightforward at times, particularly between the people that I know. And that's a good thing, right? I'm glad that they can say what they want to say in that straightforward way to me. I think it's great because I'm not going to take offense. I will listen to them. And I think only by talking about it can you progress, really. Well, not just talk, a little bit of action too, right?
Exactly.
Talking's good.
What would you say has been one of your most uncomfortable conversations where you were like, "Ooh," where it almost you didn't even know what to say, how to react? It was sort of, I didn't know that was actually a thing. I didn't know that was your reality.
No, there's one moment that sticks, and I was just too new to this country to know what was happening, because this country has its own words, it has its own slang, it has its own offensive words. And I could see at some point that it was in a social situation. I didn't know any of these people, but one person was shouting and saying stuff to another person, words that I'm not going to repeat on here. And I could see something was happening, but I didn't understand it. I didn't know it. I didn't understand the words. I didn't know the words or the impact of the words on the other person. And I often remember that. And I'm not sure particularly why, but I suppose if I'd known what was happening, because I now since know what was happening, I wish I'd had the opportunity to know then, to be able to actually step in and just say, hold on a moment. So some of the other hard conversations, I'll share a moment with you. When I joined and I got my first job in South Africa, and I often used to have a question at the beginning, like, is this the company I work in, or is this the country? Because I didn't know the difference between corporate culture and company culture, because it was the first one. But we had we went away on some like induction training thing, and there were a bunch of people. It was with a retailer, so there were. I was working in IT. There were people from the regional office. There were people from the stores, just like anybody who'd recently joined, and we all had to go around and say a little bit about our background. And I was going to go first, and like you rehearse what you're going to say. I was going to go first, and I remember saying, come from England, grew up, went to university, got a job, working in IT as a business analyst or whatever I am, fairly normal, really. And I remember I was going to end up with those sort of three words, and then for some reason I didn't go first. The lady changed who went first. And there are about 5 or 6 other people. I heard one guy whose best friend was shot dead in the street in some gang-related incident when he was like in his teens. There was a young African boy working in the stores telling me how he walked 20 kilometers to school every day, and he put his feet in cow pats in order to warm them up along the way. And there was somebody else, there was some drug story as well. And by the time it got round to me, Joe with his normal university life, it was just like, I was lost for words, just like, no, I've been very blessed, and that was a real reality check of this country. And as I say, it was an opportunity to listen, to hear some stories. And 25 years on, I still remember that crystal clear, really. That was hard, not possibly in the way that you thought, but when you ask the question, but it's hard to hear that stuff, right? It sort of brings you on the verge of tears, really. It's just heart-wrenching.
So one thing I liked that you said there and you did that. This is actually a great example because this is something that I do want to bring to the forefront as I've had many conversations in the diversity, equity, and inclusion space. And I've had uncomfortable conversations as well. What I like that you did not do there is it went around the room. You heard of all of these trials and tribulations, and you didn't minimize it by either saying, well, a lot of people go through that, or other people have experienced that, or trying to put yourself or a story that you had in there to just complement or supplement. It really sounds to me that you really took it to heart and you were like, you know what? I almost don't have anything to say
Yeah,
because
no,
as
I
I
had
look
nothing.
back, I'm blessed.
Nothing.
After hearing everything, the appreciation of hearing others their reality that may not be your
Yeah,
reality, but it's definitely
yeah,
theirs,
yeah,
and giving them that platform, giving them that moment to have that moment and not minimize it by coming up with something else, I think
yeah,
is a beautiful thing too.
yeah. No, it was a very milestone moment, I think, for
Mhm.
just understanding a very little bit about this country. Um, but so, and I think, I mean, I changed as a person. Like, I am totally different to who I would have been had I not come here. And I've been thinking about that quite a lot lately. Like, I really, not to say I wouldn't have been a nice person, but I would not have the empathy that I have for other people. I would not probably listen enough. I'd be more caught up in my own world, just, more selfish behaviors. Not to say I'm not selfish. I have my moments, but I'm definitely a very different person because of it.
There's
Happily,
right,
happily.
right. There's
Yeah.
something to be said about that. I know my first experience and it's only my only experience. I shouldn't even say my first experience. It's been my only experience going to South Africa. Well, number one, I was a nervous wreck. I'm just going to be completely honest. I was a nervous wreck.
Okay.
I was going. I'm going to the motherland. I've always wanted to go to the continent, right? And I'm like, so I'm nervous, and I've always felt that every time I've interacted with individuals from the continent of Africa, there's this level of excellence and quality that comes with that. There's an expectation, there's a standard of
Yeah.
excellence and quality. And I was nervous about that. So when I went and I did my workshop, I'm telling you, I was a nervous wreck, a 3-hour workshop. And
Mm.
I'm like, okay, this is going to determine if people either accept me to even do the keynote that I had on the second day of the conference or not. Right. So I was nervous, but the workshop went well and I felt at home. It was a very welcoming. I
Mm.
felt at home.
Yeah, they're lovely, lovely and welcoming.
Lovely, yeah,
Yeah.
very, very welcoming. And then I'm sitting down having breakfast with you, and you gonna sit up here and ask me, so would you mind being the keynote for the first day of the conference? And then I totally I held my composure with you, but inside, I think I had my heart dropped, my stomach I was like, sure, Joe, let's do that. Right. Because in my mind, the keynote who opens up the conference sets the tone.
Mm.
So I take that very seriously. And I'm like, oh my goodness, I'm in front of all of these people that I'm not even from this country. Right. And
Mm.
that wasn't my first international gig. But you would think because Africa is a part of my country, it is part of my heritage, with me
Yeah.
being from Barbados and whatnot, it is part of my heritage. So you would think I would be comfortable, right? No, I was a nervous wreck. I was putting
Yeah.
a lot on me and whatnot. But the people again were so welcoming. We're so nice. We're so open. But I was telling a friend of mine yesterday, Mashaba, actually from South Africa,
Okay.
that trip changed my life. That trip. Now, again, I've been to other countries, right? I've
Yeah.
traveled, but there was something about going to the continent of Africa and just experiencing the culture, the people, how on one side of the road everything can be great and on the other side of the road not
Yeah.
so great,
Yeah.
and how you experience that. I can totally understand how you were saying that has changed your life because it changed mine. when I came back to the US, I was a totally different person. I had a totally different appreciation for the things that I have, number one.
Yeah.
And the things that are just, I would have to say, I probably take for granted. You know,
Yeah.
electricity. You know, I don't have to worry about blackouts, right?
Yeah.
But that's a natural part of what you have to
We
entail.
we yeah, we've got apps for that.
See, it's just a
Yeah.
totally different way of living and having that appreciation. But also, a lot of times, there's something that you said as well. When you were hearing those stories around the table, you were actively listening.
Yeah.
You were taking in what people were saying, and you were
Yeah.
taking that to heart. You didn't feel like you had to respond. You felt
No.
like, yeah, I just need to listen. And I do think sometimes that's hard for people to not
Yeah.
have a response, and not try and fix something, or not try and help you define your reality. And you did none of those things.
I think, to be fair, I was probably in a little bit of shock. It was like listening to movie scripts, really, like some strange, Hollywood sort of in your face kind of storyline. I was blown away that this kind of thing, that this room could have so much of that kind of story. And it was just incredible, just incredible. Yeah, yeah. But this country has a soul. It really does. It's
Yes.
it's I could come here because obviously in many ways I'm the past, right? Middle-aged white guy with a bit of a grey beard, right? I'm the past. I have a bad history of that, but I have not experienced anything but love from the people that I've got to know. That it's just got a wonderful heart, a wonderful soul. This country, yeah.
And that says a lot, right? Because I did wonder. So that was one of the questions I got asked quite a bit when people found out I was making a trip to Africa. One of the first questions I got, and again, hopefully this doesn't offend anybody on the call, so I'm just going to open it up with that. One of the first questions I got is, are there white people there? That was one of the first questions I got. So, how many white people did you see? And then you probably want to take some water because they don't have any running water.
Yeah.
And they probably don't have microwaves and things
Yeah.
of that nature, right? Totally opposite, right? Some of the most beautiful vineyards I saw
Yeah.
in South Africa, and a lot of things. And that's because we don't know. It's,
Yeah.
sometimes it's what you see on TV and what's put in
Yeah.
the media. But it is an interesting dynamic, though, that I see in South Africa. Like you said, is they're accepting of everybody,
Yeah.
even despite the past.
Yeah.
Right? Now let's be clear. Neither Joe nor I are saying there are no issues in the continent of South
Oh,
Africa. That is not what we're saying. But
far
what we
from.
are saying, yeah, is a lot of the people that I've encountered have a mentality of hope and
Yeah.
warmth and embracing. And I loved how you said it. There's a soul there. That's a little bit
Yeah.
different. How do we replicate that in other places?
Yeah. I don't know. I wish I knew what the root cause of this was, but it is phenomenal. It really is phenomenal. If I ever have to leave this country, it's going to be like the saddest day of my life. It,
Oh,
it, it really is. But no, I'm sort of here to stay as long as I can. Um, I think this country's got a lot of good stories, and I think it's got a lot of nice stories to write
mhm.
into the future too. There certainly is more and more opportunity, I think, for people, sort of with every day that passes. A lot more people who perhaps weren't educated in the past getting educated today,
Yeah.
and so yeah, very very bright future.
What would you say was your hardest thing when you moved from the UK to South Africa as far as getting acclimated? Because I believe we can make that as a parallel to business analysis. When you move from one environment to another environment, what are some of the things you need to consider in when you think about diversity, equity, and inclusion? Okay, we already know you're a rock star BA. We already know you got the BA skills. That's great. But the interpersonal is just as important. So, how, did you make that transition from the UK into this country that you knew some about, but you didn't know a lot about to get to be the Joe Newbert you are in Africa?
It's probably a couple of things, right? One is football. I'm a big football fan. Football is a big thing here too. So the Premier League, the UK Premier League, English Premier League, that was like one in, because suddenly you're having a conversation. Another thing is running. So I do a lot of running, and running's very much a subculture. So you start to get to people know there too. Then the other thing is I came out here with some of that knowledge that you talk of, and perhaps the company I landed, I was somebody who knew a bit more than other people, and I was happy to share it. I was happy to teach it, and I think through that, promotions and things like that happened, and it just filled my confidence a lot, and there was encouragement from other people. Hey, why don't you come along and talk here? I think you'd be, and there's just encouraging words all the way, different people, and somehow it just seemed to happen, really. I think because the conversation's so open. There's another little story I tell, which sort of shows the contrast between like a UK culture and a South African culture. So before I left the UK, I was working for a big American bank, actually. And one of the big bosses had an announcement to make. So he came out of his corner office, he sort of spoke over the open plan area, and he made whatever announcement he made. And then he said, are there any questions? And some very typical Brit, sort of put their hand and said, oh, excuse me, would you mind if I just perhaps asked a question about, all of those little words, like, very, very almost apologetic in asking. And they asked their question. And then almost like the same week I got my first job here, the big boss came out of the corner office, and he had an announcement to make over the open plan area. And he made this announcement. There was this DBA in the back. He just went, what the hell, Harold? Although he used stronger language than that, right? I thought I'd save you for the pod. And I just remember thinking, like, how different these cultures are, and I do think it's like it's that helps. Yeah. It's really encouraging. It's out there. It's not, you've never got to second guess anything. So it's wonderful. I'm gonna segue myself here, Paula.
Okay.
Right?
Here we go.
Here we go. I'm gonna bring it. But you asked me. Why do I feel this is important to business analysis? And I perhaps steered it more in a sort of wider world context. I don't know whether this diversity and divergent link up through like the root meanings of their words, but I mentioned personas and things, and another thing that's sort of quite trendy at the moment is design thinking. Right. And design thinking has something in it called divergent thinking. So divergent thinking is all about getting those broad ideas, right? Like the crazy stuff, the different stuff, like just lots of stuff, right? Let's have all the ideas, because, we don't want to just take the first answer, because the first answer is usually a bit rubbish, right? Mm-hmm. And I just feel like if we think about just something as simple as design thinking, as divergent thinking, if you are to come up with divergent ideas, you need diversity in the room. And the broader your diversity, probably the better the quality of the ideas you're going to have in the end. And I feel without that, we're all going to be a little bit blinkered, aren't we? So I think diversity's got a major role to play when it comes to like not, thinking of problems, because I only know about my problems. Right. I want to think divergently about all problems, like who's suffering from what, who's struggling with what are the big things that we need to solve here, and then once we've figured out that big, hairy problem that we want to solve, then when it comes up to solving it, again, we need lots of diversity in the room to think of all of the different crazy ideas that might do something to that. So I think it's got a massive role to play going forward for for people, for projects.
You bring up a great point, because if you think of divergent diversity and you think of having the diversity in the room to make those products, you want to also consider the customer base you serve. So
Yeah.
if you're serving different cultures, you're serving different areas, how much more powerful is it to have a person from that area give you
Exactly.
feedback, right? Instead of you
Yeah.
trying to guess and figure it out.
Yeah.
They're going to tell you, no, this doesn't work here, but what does work is here. So when you create that product or that solution, you're taking in all of those things. But I tend to see that some people are resistant to diversity in the room because, number one, they don't want to lose control, they don't want to lose power, and
Yeah.
they still want to stay relevant. That's what I found when
Yeah.
there's been resistance, even resistance to change. And that's a mindset we have got to get out of, because there's an abundance for all of us. And I know sometimes that's hard to think about, especially if you've been in situations where people have taken your ideas or implemented things that were yours. And I understand all of that. We've been through that. But to your point, having that diversity in the room is great, because there's been times where I've come up, I thought it was a great idea. I was like, yeah, I got it. And then somebody be like, yeah, but did you think about this? Well, no. Why should I care about that? and then they talk about it. I was like, okay, so maybe my idea wasn't that great, right? So, but because you gave me that feedback, now my idea is going to be greater, and it's going to really have a huge impact, and it's going to add value. So I do think, like Kristen has said, there's a fear, but also when you embrace it, the opportunities are amazing. The doors that can be opened are amazing if you embrace that. So how have you gotten comfortable embracing difference?
I was sort of like just dropped into it here, really. Suddenly it was there. I had no choice but to accept it. I'm, the one, I'm the guest here, right? Polite British boy, he's not going to upset too many people, really. And yeah, things are different, and I suppose it's just like looking back and seeing it. I don't know. It's just who I am. I don't know that I've gotten used to it. It's just something I needed to be at a point, and yeah, just is how it is, I think.
And how do you do it on projects if you see that there are people who are not embracing that diversity? Are you the type that will speak up and call it out? Are you the type that will hope it just works itself out and it'll just fester? How do you handle? Because I know you've had to have been in some of those situations.
Yeah, I think I'm quite tactful. I can be quite tactful in all of this. So one, I will confront is too strong a word. So I don't confront it, because I don't think confrontation is going to help in any way at all. So it's not about confronting it. What it is about raising it. It's about surfacing it. And I think every situation is different. Sometimes you can do that in the room with everybody when it's said, like you can, i.e. you can get away with it. That's okay. I think there are times where you need to say it in the room because everybody in the room needs to hear you saying it, like, to that person, so it's not so much about them. And there are times where actually you need to not do that in front of everybody, but actually say something on the side. And I think the other thing here is really just leading by example. I think that's one of the greatest things that we can do. There's a lot of stuff that's said about DEI, and you do wonder, is it said or is it, done? So I think a lot can be said, but I think leading by example shows, that you do it. And I think overall people respect that on both sides. I think, the people who are being supported respect the fact that you're supporting them. And I also think that the people that you're tackling actually get respect for you as well, because you're prepared to have that conversation with them. But as you say, there's always a few outliers that are just, that's the way they are, that's how they were brought up, and it's not going to change. But then the conversation's often slightly different. It's not trying to change their position, it's more just letting them know that that's not going to be tolerated. So I'm happy to have the conversation. I don't think I actually have to have them very often, To be honest, I think most people here are open. There are prejudices, of course, and biases and things, but I find that they're publicly fewer and far between.
That's awesome. That's awesome. We do have a question. Yay, we got a question. We do. We have a question from Christine. She wants to know, how does South Africa culture differ from UK's culture? I'm interested too. What would you say, Joe?
I'm not sure what the short answer to this is, Christine. They're just very different countries. As I say, it's been a long time ago that I was living and working in the UK. That country has really moved on, I think, with its diversity too. But I think perhaps people hide behind words a little more in the UK. They'll say a sentence that sounds very watered down, but the meaning behind it is quite strong. And often, I think for people who didn't grow up in the UK, that they can often miss that subtlety. Whereas in South Africa, I think there's a lot more conversations that had more openly, and I think people say things more straightforwardly. I mean, that's one of the ways that I've changed. I do think, I sort of say what I think much more in this country than what I would say I would think in the UK. I think, but yeah, that's probably it. Otherwise, it's quite the same. There's a lot of from a sort of logistical perspective, we perhaps take after the US more than we take after the UK, but from a sort of education, pop culture kind of thing, we take after the UK, sort of musically and from a sport perspective. So little few alignments with a few different countries. But the other thing is perhaps to mention here is we've got 11 official languages in this country. That's a lot of different cultures, right? There's a strong mix. We used to be on the spice route, as a country, so there's a lot of variety. There is a lot of culture, and I think mostly those cultures are respected by each other. Obviously, there's exceptions, but yeah, it's like there's a lot of different culture in this country.
What would you say? How can I say this as you're talking about the countries? What would you say is the future of DE&I? What do you think some of the challenges and opportunities will be for the future of this conversation? Because I really don't want diversity, equity, and inclusion to just be a buzzword or a trending topic. Diversity, equity, inclusion, at some point, I hope actually goes away because it's just a part of our DNA. It's just how we treat people. I don't think it's going to go away anytime soon. But it would be nice if we could get to that point where we were embracing all the difference and whatnot, and of still getting education. But what do you think is the future of it in your mind?
That's a difficult one, Paul.
Isn't it though?
Yeah. Probably a couple of angles on this. One, as I say to you, I think a lot of people are very open, right? And it's almost like a conversation that doesn't need to happen with them, apart from to understand that it's happening to you, but between you and me, we don't need to, like, you don't need to explain that to me, right? Like, I get it, and I can support in some of the challenges that you might face and vice versa. But then I do feel like on the other side, there's almost this hierarchy, bureaucracy, that organization that perhaps does have a little more or less tolerance, more hatred even. And yeah, I feel like there's a bit of polar stuff building up, and it's across the world, So I'm feeling like we've got a bit of two extremes happening at the moment. But in between all of that, there's day to day, right? There's organizations. And I think, we often talk about organizations, you might say, like, is it a tick box thing, right? One thing that I often think gets forgotten is there's no such thing as an organization. People hide behind that word. Like, if you think about it, an organization is made up of people. So what we're saying is, are people treating it as a tick box exercise? Like, I don't want to put it on a brand label or on that building, that name above that thing. There's people in that boardroom. There's people in those suites, in those offices, making those day-to-day decisions. So when we ask questions like, is it a tick box exercise? I think we need to get more personal about that. Actually, we need to say it's John, right? not that particular organization, but like start having conversations with the people. So I think when we bring it back to that, it's where we started. There are some people who are like driving it forward more than there are other people, and so I do think the conversation needs to happen. I think people need to be called out in the best way possible when things like that do happen. I also think the other side of the word organization is about being organized, right? Like, that's what organization means. It's the organizing of like resources and things, isn't it, to achieve a goal. So then if I think about organizing of companies, they probably do need a little bit of a reorganization. Even things like job descriptions, right? Like are limiting. And the example I've often used is that if I write a job spec, that job spec is, I'm going to have a bias that pretty much like writes that job spec to say, like, because I've got that, I sort of expect them to have that, because I got that experience or that education, or because I've done these things in the job in the past. That's sort of what I'm going to expect other people to do who come into this role. So already I've put out a cookie cutter, right, that I'm expecting people to fulfill. And then when I get people in the interview room, of course, I've got biases where, like, if they mirror me, if they use the same words as me, if we connect on something, I'm just recruiting a team of 10 Joes here, and that's just rubbish for everyone. So I do feel like, and I know, I mean, I know I'm doing it and I try and fight it, but it's not always possible to win that battle with myself. So this is where I say, I think, I don't want to say it's tick box, but we've got an awful lot of work to do when we got a lot of reorganization to do and a lot of education to do. And I mean, that's gonna be in every country. So, there are going to be white countries, black countries, like all different color countries, right? And like they're all battling diversity, like, so I think it's a human struggle, right?
I 100% agree. I agree with you with the hiring practices, because we all have our own biases, but it really starts with you first, right? So I
Yeah.
first have to acknowledge where I am from a diversity, equity, and inclusion perspective, how much I understand. And then I like what you said earlier, be that role model, be the change you want to see, because it's going to take all of us to be that change, to embrace. And then there's always going to be those outliers that are just not going to want to, and there's nothing we can do about that. But I do a lot of self introspection and a self reflection, because I was telling a story last week, and I remember a gentleman at work, when I told this story years ago, try and rewrite my story, which I thought was interesting. But I told this story that in about, I would say around 2005, I had issues with my own race.
Okay.
I disassociated from my race. I didn't want to deal with anybody that was from my race. Okay, this is a Paula problem. This wasn't a race problem. This was a Paula problem. What I had done is I had put everybody in a box based on some experiences, really bad experiences I had with individuals that looked like me.
Okay.
I don't think I realized how badly I had done that, because I was also in survival mode. I was going through a divorce. I was moving. There was a lot going on in my life. And then when I finally got settled, I was invited to join the Black African American Employee Resource Network group. It wasn't called that at the time, but that's what it was. I didn't want to do it, Joe. I was like, I don't want to be, no. I am done. I literally said, I'm done with Black people. This is what I said to the person who invited me. I was very direct and honest, and I just came from the East Coast, so I was really, really direct. I'm not as direct now here, but I was quite direct then. And I really had an issue. And, you know, it took me having to do self-reflection and self-introspection to really identify what is the issue within me that I have with this race. And then it had nothing to do with the race. It had to do with the experiences that I had, the scenarios that I went through. And I just bucketed everybody into this box and said, I'm just done. I don't want to deal with you. We're all alike. I don't want to deal with it anymore. And it was really me joining that Employee Resource Network group that got me reconnected back in a way with my race and with my culture. In addition to, I was raising twins, and I didn't want my kids to have that mentality, because then I'm going to be a part of the problem that we have today, right? So my kids kind of saved me in that. And I remember telling that story, and I had a non-melanated friend say to me, well, it's not that you really had issues with your race, right? You didn't really have it. What did I just tell you? Didn't I just tell you what my story? Why are you trying to change my story and make it sound better than it is? Don't make this sound better than it was. It wasn't a good thing that I did. Call it out, right? And that's the thing. Don't season it. Don't soften the blow. It is what it is. That's what I went through, and I had to go through that. And it gave me a deeper appreciation on how quickly your biases can play into.
Well, you just, I mean, you broad stroke brushed like an entire group of people, a set of people based on some experience with some individuals. And I think humans are complicated, and we all do that, you know, like normally not with our own kind in a way, but like with other kind, but we do that. We're complicated like that.
So anybody who's out there doing, and anybody who's out there doing that, if you've taken a whole, what's the word I'm looking for? A whole group of people, and you've clumped them into a box because of an experience you had with one or two people, I need you to find a closet somewhere in your house and do some self-reflection and self-introspection. Because the problem, I will almost guarantee you, the problem is not with that entire group of people. The problem is a scenario that you had, or an experience that you had, that you're holding against all of these people, and it's not fair. It's not fair for you to bring in your baggage into another group where they've done you nothing because of one or two bad people, right? And we can do that. Again, I did it, and as you said, I did it with my own race, and I had to apologize. You know, I had to forgive. Actually, I really had to forgive. I didn't need to forgive for the other person. I needed to forgive for me so I could move on, because I can't bucket everybody in that. And that's a lot of times our biases come up and we don't realize it, whether they're unconscious or conscious. Don't group everybody in one box. It's not fair. You know, it's just not, you just shouldn't do that. Now, or if you've had experiences, go get help. You know, there's nothing wrong with therapy or, you know, getting counseling or anything like that, because you're actually missing out on some really great experiences because of that.
That's good. I was going to pick up on your word experience. I mean, I'd visited South Africa a number of times before I moved here. I'd spent all in all, I guess, about 6 months here. I thought I knew the place, but in retrospect, I knew nothing. But the day I flew here to live here permanently, my stomach has never been in a bigger knot in its entire life, right? I was nervous. And then, you know, then I land in Cape Town, and then I got to go to Joburg. I've not been to Joburg before, like to Johannesburg, right? So got a little bit of anxiety about this, because I've heard a lot about Johannesburg over the years from the UK and stuff. And then one time I went to Zimbabwe, and I've never been to Zimbabwe before. It's Robert Mugabe's land, you know. It's like you hear stuff, and I mean, honestly, I've got friends for life after spending 3 days there. I mean, honestly, it was just absolutely well. You mentioned professional Africa earlier. There's Zimbabweans, amazing people. But I went there, and then last year I went to Sri Lanka, and I'm like, oh my gosh, you know, in another country, a different language, like I know nothing about the culture, and you know, after a day, like everything's fine, everyone's friendly, they're great, you know, it's like they're interested in you. Where are you from? What are you doing here? You know, and they're trying to make connections too. They hear you from South Africa, they're like, okay, cricket, you know, so you got to talk about the cricket. And I think every time you take a step, it can feel you know, you can feel nervous, it can raise your anxiety a little bit, but you soon realize actually it's great. Right. And I do think that word experience, I think we got to keep having experiences. We've got to extend our boundaries. I think the further we extend our boundaries, the broader we go, the better that is for you and for everybody else as well, because we just become more experienced. And the word tolerant is jumping into my head, but it's the wrong word, you know, because it's not about tolerating anything. Exactly. But I do think we just become a little more tolerant. I'm going to use the word anyway, but
we become more open to those experiences and to life and to the journey. Yeah. No, I 100% agree with you. And I think that's a great piece of advice to leave us with, actually, as a great segue into a piece of advice is experience.
Yeah.
You know, experience other people, experience other people's journeys, experience other people's realities, even if it makes you feel uncomfortable, even if it makes you feel like I really can't relate to that because I just can't understand it. But just because it's not your reality does not mean it's not somebody else's. And we all have different experiences. So I love that to experience. So you see, Joe, you made it. You made it through a diversity, equity, and inclusion conversation. Amazingly. I loved it. So where can people stay connected with you if they want to continue to talk to you about anything related to business analysis?
Which way? Over there, I see. There we go. I see it. Yeah, that way.
Right.
Yeah, I'm just mainly on LinkedIn. I don't have enough time to do all of the Instagrams and the TikToks and X so. Yeah, you can find me on LinkedIn if you want to connect. That would be good. I'd like to increase my sort of boundaries with people I know. So yeah, please get in touch if that's what you want to do. And thank you for having me on, Paula. It has been an incredible conversation. I'm glad I braved your pod. Yeah, thank you. Appreciate it.
Definitely thank you, Joe, for coming on. Thank you to my BA Ninja Circle for engaging in this conversation. No, it's not your typical BA conversation, but at the end of the day, you've all heard me say this multiple times, 80% of what we do is interpersonal. And diversity, equity, and inclusion is a part of that. And embracing each other is a part of that. You can definitely subscribe to Dojo Talk on YouTube and on Spotify. If you enjoyed this show, please help pass the pod along by leaving a review, leaving comments, giving me a 5-star rating. This probably sounds familiar, Joe, because I actually took this from yours. It sounds familiar, right? I'm just reusing great content. You can keep the BA Ninja training going by, again, leaving your comments, especially whatever stories you might want to tell about diversity, equity, and inclusion. Until then, though, take care, keep growing, and domo arigato. Because I got to throw in we didn't talk anything martial arts today, which is fine, but I have to throw in some sort of martial arts feel. But it's been wonderful. We will catch you all the next time on Dojo Talk. Have a great rest of your day.